morning, I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kutin.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider the news of the day and then reconsider it. Let's begin with Bersih 2.0's call for the immediate registration of those who are 18 years and above. And this is even if the automatic voters registration mechanism is not ready, responding, I believe, to the EC's comments, saying that, well, they need to look at all considerations before Undi 18 can be implemented, and this process could take between 18 to 24 months, Sharaad.
Yeah. What I think Bersih is reminding us of, it was this wonderful energy that came from the campaign to get young people, lower their voting age, get them to participate in the future of the country. Now, while everybody understands that there are complexities involved, there are legal issues, there are interministerial issues, the databases that have to be linked, and all kinds of things that need to happen and will take time. In the intervening months and years, there will be by-elections. Now, the question is, should young people then be left out of that process?
Okay, so, you know, all the 18-year-olds who, while waiting for the automatic voter registration to be put in place, will not be able to vote in, say, by-elections of Kimanis, for instance, or even the Sarawak State election that could be happening pretty soon. So, what we're very focused on the general elections. We're missing out, you know, young people are missing out on an opportunity to be part of the democratic system through these by-elections.
Right. I think there's also a very interesting principle here, right? On one hand, you have a legal and bureaucratic processes that need to be respected so that the integrity of the system is upheld. But you also are reminded that if there's a will, there's political will, they will find a way. And the way is, so the trade-off is really including people. So if inclusion and the politics of inclusion are the principles by which the Pakatan government is going to push forward, then this must happen.
Well, okay, if I could just play devil's advocate for a second, I'm just wondering whether this is something that we need to rush, because as you mentioned, you know, there are processes to be put in place. It takes time to amend laws, to take a look at, you know, putting all the ecosystem in place. Is this something we want to rush given its importance?
Well, precisely because it's important to include people in the electoral system. And if you remember, so many of the problems we had in the past emanated from the authorities kind of adhering to the letter of the law, not the spirit of the law, right? So kind of saying, well, we can't do this because the laws, you know, prohibit this or interpreting the laws in the most conservative way possible. What you want this government to do is to interpret it in a way that adheres to the principles of inclusivity and participation, and to go the extra mile. I think that's what Bersih is very well aware of the legal complexities.
All right, well, the other story that caught our attention today is a business story. Aurora Mulia Sdn Bhd, which is a firm linked to Tycoon Tan Sri Syed Mokhtar Al-Bukhari, has bought another 2.7% share stake in Media Prima Berhad. That means that this company now owns 23% of Media Prima. What do you make of this, Sharaad?
Well, you know, okay, so this is an interesting story in that, you know, when we talk about democratization and moving the country forward in terms of participation, we put power in the hands of young people through the vote. But who actually controls the levers of power in this country? Who owns it? And who are those who are associated with the power brokers, the political party power brokers in this country, who actually have an inordinate amount of influence? And so when we look at those who own media, for instance, whether they're individual entrepreneurs like Syed Mokhtar, or they're companies that have political party associations like Huaren that owns The Star, you have there a sense of how power is actually distributed in this country.
Okay, so the reason I thought this story was particularly interesting was that, okay, Aurora Mulia wanted this stake in Media Prima so much that they paid a premium for it, a 28% premium for this 2.7% share stake. This is the fourth time that Aurora Mulia has purchased Media Prima. Now, what does this mean in terms of the landscape, the media landscape, right, in terms of ownership? So it means that media ownership in Malaysia could very well be controlled by a few. And is this something that we really want? Looking at Syed Mokhtar Tan Sri Syed Mukhtar Al-Bukhari's ownership. So it turns out it could be that he has, according to The Edge and to the Singapore Straits Times, that he has also a 12% stake in Media Prima that is held by a proxy, so held by Mitsubishi UFJ Financial. If you combine these two stakes together, he could potentially own 36% of Media Prima.
You know what, Melissa, all this that you explained reminds me is how complex institutional and corporate linkages are, whether it's in terms of ownership and who owns a stake in companies that are not necessarily often visible to the public or to the lay person who doesn't understand corporate Malaysia, is that all of it hides how power is in fact distributed.
Sure.
Now, the question is, what does government do, especially with industry like media, where perhaps investments require huge amounts of outlay? So do we have laws, for instance, that promote, or policies that promote diversity of ownership in the media? Do we have ways of thinking about the media, especially as other countries have done, starting up or enabling community radio, for instance? All these ways of democratizing and devolving power from the very rich and very powerful in any country.
Do you think that media ownership is something that should be regulated? I mean, or should it be left up to market forces? Supply and demand, it's willing buyer, willing seller. Should it be left up to market forces?
Well, I mean, I think all governments seek to regulate in a way that either can be enabling, but yes, we think of the market as as the best way to, in fact, structure arrangements in terms of ownership and who can do the best thing. But governments have a role in that if they see that certain political powers or interests have inordinate control over a system, they should jump in and regulate it to make sure, on the basis of what? The principle of democratizing the media.
Okay. Well, speaking about inordinate control, now just what do we mean by inordinate control, right? So as I mentioned earlier, so Tan Sri Syed Mukhtar Al-Bukhari has the potential to own 36% of Media Prima. He also owns 14% of Utusan. Now, if we can just pull up this visual that's on my laptop, it is also believed that he wholly owns the publisher of the Malaysian Reserve. Now, what does this mean if this is all true? It could mean that there could be a consolidation of some of these papers, particularly interesting with the Malay language papers, because Media Prima under the NSTP umbrella owns Berita Harian and Harian Metro. So if Syed Mukhtar owns Utusan, and could we be seeing a consolidation of Utusan and Berita Harian? Could we be seeing a consolidation of Cosmo with Harian Metro? This will be very interesting in terms of who controls the narrative for the Malay-speaking media.
Right. And that, of course, is also part of the kind of the future of politics in the country. Utusan, in its recent debacle, had a lot of people say, well, we don't want to see Utusan die. But of course, Utusan was closely tied to the previous administration, of course, UMNO as a party, and wasn't necessarily seen as a champion of either balanced journalism or, in any respects, a media organization that championed democracy. So it's a very complex field to play, but I do think that giving clarity to the complex corporate arrangements that underscore these things that we consume on a daily basis is important.
Something to think about. I also want to highlight a story that's quite interesting. Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, the Prime Minister, gave a press conference today in which he announced that as part of the government's bid to curb corruption, body-mounted cameras will soon be issued to enforcement personnel of agencies, he says, that are susceptible to abuse. Now, here we have a clip from him, from that press conference.
We can see what the person is doing, the officer is doing to the client. That is very important. But there are other things like CCTV, which has to be installed in certain places. This also applies to the police, because sometimes the lockup and all that will need to have cameras so that we will know what actually happened.
So he's saying that for certain officers, so that we can see what they are doing, and if they turn it off, we will also know. This is quite interesting, because this is the way that the government is saying, one way for them to curb corruption is so that surveillance of everything you do. Do you think it will be effective?
Well, why not? I mean, I think it's a tool in a toolkit that we all need, or governments need, and societies need to get to the heart of the game of corruption, right? It's not, I don't think, a panacea. I don't think it's going to work for everything in every circumstance and for all peoples. But it's interesting because it's not going to be just surveillance of the police officer. It's also been surveillance of ordinary people. And sometimes, there's willing buyer, willing seller when it comes to corrupt practices, right? I've violated a law. The enforcement officer turns up. I say, hey, perhaps we can settle this, right?
So caught in the act of offering a bribe.
Yeah, well, potentially. I don't know how these cameras work. Can you just block it out and mute it or rip it off? Well,
I think it's interesting because you're right. It's perhaps one bullet in the arsenal of a way to fight corruption. In the US, you see that with the police, wearing these body-mounted cameras, a way to, I guess, fight against a litigious society, but also to protect not just the police officer, but also the public. Now, I would be particularly curious to see how they're going to implement it, because again, it's the devil's in the detail. Implementation is important, but also the government will also be seeking to install more CCTVs in police lockups. So that's something that I welcome as well.
Right, because custodial deaths and so on in police lockups. What's also interesting is this balances out, I think, a discourse that often talks about, giving people morality or talking to them about good practices. That kind of cultural, kind of approach, I think it's good, but it's not foolproof. And also, I think, is based on a kind of notion or assumption that if you know what is right, you will do the right thing.
Right.
But sometimes you know what's right to do and you still do the wrong thing.
Still do the wrong thing. Okay, we're going to keep a close eye on that story as it develops. But after this, we're going to come back and take a look at citizenship equality. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, with me, Sharaad Kutan. Now, the Women, Family and Community Development Ministry has urged the Home Ministry to review the relevant laws to allow children of Malaysian women who are born overseas to obtain automatic citizenship. Currently, the federal constitution guarantees citizenship to children born overseas to Malaysian fathers, but is silent on children born overseas to Malaysian mothers. Now, helping us better understand the impact of this on Malaysian families, we have on the line Ivy Josiah, gender expert for the Malaysian Campaign for Equal Citizenship. Ivy, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for speaking with us this evening. Now, I want to talk about this campaign, which is led by the Foreign Spouses Support Group. Essentially, they want to get to the root of unequal citizenship rights for the children of Malaysian women. Now, talk to us a little bit about this issue. Help us put this into context. What is the root of the discrimination, Ivy?
What's the root? It's the patriarchy, Melissa. You see, right now, we all know that fathers are able to confer citizenship to their children when the children are born overseas. So basically, a Malaysian father could be in Germany with his German wife. As soon as his child is born, he will go to the nearest Malaysian embassy and inform them. And within 3 days to 3 weeks, it's all sorted. The child is Malaysian. He'll get the papers. However, when it comes to a Malaysian mother, and if she's living in Germany married to a German man, when she gives birth, she has to apply. See the difference here? Not inform or confirm, but apply through another provision in the Constitution, because the Constitution says only fathers can confer this. So when
isn't it also true that our Constitution guarantees gender equality, or that there can be no discrimination on the basis of gender?
Well, Article 8 does say that. We worked very hard with women's groups to bring about that change in 2001. Despite the fact that Article 8.2 does guarantee gender equality, there are other provisions. There's always this. Well, the spirit is that they should guarantee equality. However, because of Article 14, which has the word father and not father and mother or father or mother or parents, one at least, we're looking at this kind of language, it allows for immigration to then start having processes that says, well, the mother is not equal. In law, by law, she's not equal. So therefore, you have to go through processes which can last, for a long time. And it could be anything from 1 to 5 years, rejections without any reasons. And of course, the root of the problem is that the notion that mothers, wives, women follow their husbands, children should take the father's nationality, which is so unrealistic now, isn't it? Because, we have choices. I may want my children to be Malaysian. I may want my children to choose at the age of 18. Or maybe I'm in a toxic marriage and I want to come back to Malaysia and I want to bring my children back to Malaysia, but not to have to go to 2 different separate lines and have to apply for social visit passes, because you have to keep getting out of the country because the visa is limited for your children.
Ivy, so you mentioned processes, right? And that's important when it comes to the approval and the application of citizenship.
Right.
So I believe the Home Ministry has actually come out to say that they are going to be looking at the SOP for citizenship. They want to cut the processing time. They want to make the process simpler. Shouldn't that be, sufficient? Wouldn't that be enough?
Not at all. Because they've been saying this for the past 10 years. They've been announced to say, come, we will apply, we will confirm, we will make sure it's easy, but the reality on the ground is for the past 10 years, it's been very ad hoc. Yes, some people do get it in a few months, because one of my colleagues, in fact, got it just by tweeting the former Minister of Home Affairs. But the reality on the ground is that everybody has different stories.
Right. So what you want to do, Ivy, is amend the Constitution, right? How do you go about doing that with this campaign? How do you go about amending the Constitution?
Well, the good news is that there's been an overwhelming response. We even met with the Minister of Women before this forum that we had yesterday, and she has, said, yes, we will look into this and I'll work with the Cabinet. Of course, the Deputy Minister of Women also attended the forum. And the good news is that Lim Kit Siang, the MP for Iskandar Putri, just made a press statement to say that all 42 MPs from DAP will support this amendment. So now it's our work to go and talk to Amanah, Bersatu, UMNO, PAS and so on. We need to get all the MPs on board, to basically get them to support the amendment. So for a start, DAP has already have made a pledge that 42 of the MPs will support this amendment.
Ivy, all this while, has it been a lack of political will or just bureaucratic inertia that has prevented changes in the way women are treated in this regard?
Both, Sharaad, both, I think. It's lack of political will, because, there was at some point, there was a draft amendment to this. And I've seen that amendment, many years ago, maybe 15 years ago. It was never, brought to Parliament. And then the bureaucratic processes, yes, at the end of the day, standing behind that desk would be immigration officers or rather KDN, sorry, not KDN, JPN, the National Registration Department officers, who may exercise discretion. The law says that the Minister of Home Affairs can exercise his discretion. Well, he can also exercise his discretion by saying, let's have the same procedure as men. Okay, if we don't want to wait for this, the amendment to the Constitution may take some time, but basically, he can give out instructions, make a policy decision to say, no more Form B, everything is the same. Just change the policy, same procedure as the fathers. Because the fathers do not apply, but inform and go through a process where they confirm the citizenship of the children.
We have a new government in Putrajaya. Do you have a timeline for them? Does the campaign have a timeline for them to deliver on this particular issue?
I've learned a long time ago, in my activism over the 30 years, we don't give deadlines. We just keep saying, when they give them a deadline and say a timeline. So what are we supposed to say? If we do not, we will do what? I think we will definitely make it into a gender issue, an equality issue, an elections issue, because we're going to send it back, send it to the Pakatan Harapan, government to say this is also in your manifesto. I believe in persuasion. I believe that there is definitely more openness, because I think I've never seen, 42 MPs come forward to say, yes, we will, we'll make a commitment to this. But we want all parties to come forward. And I'm already getting, encouraging messages from other MPs. But now we have to make sure that it's visibilized, right? And they have to come out and say it. And of course, somebody has to draft that amendment, bring it to the cabinet, or rather, the cabinet have to give instructions to the Attorney General's Chamber's office to say draft. So I'm optimistic, but no timeline. Of course, between you and me, I want to see it in my lifetime. By the end of 2020. I want 2020.
Ivy, very quickly, Ivy, do we have a champion for this bill? Do you have a champion from perhaps the Women's Ministry or the Home Ministry?
Oh, definitely both the ministers and deputy ministers are champions, and so are the many MPs. So now we've got DAP, we've got some UMNO MPs, but, they were in government at some point, and they were quite sympathetic, of course.
All right.
And so we have to basically, Hishamuddin Hussein On was the one who once tweeted to say, of course, these children should be given a dual citizenship. So yes, I think we do have allies, and of course we've got quite a number of good officers in government who all see the practicality, and it's really simple: men, mothers equal fathers, right? And we have a big group of mothers. After once this forum went public, and there was been tremendous media, media awareness about this over the past, just today itself, many women have called to say, I'm a grandmother, I have a child, in Thailand. Many women have come forward to say, we didn't realize there were so many of us. So I think the voices of the mothers, I am really, have my faith in the voices of these mothers, the families, it's not the mothers, but the families who will speak up.
All right.
So, yeah. So
okay.
I'm
all
optimistic.
The best with that, Ivy. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing your insights. We'll be back with more on Consider This. Stay tuned. Thank you for staying with us on Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, with me Sharaad Kuttan. Here's what we want you to consider tonight. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has apologized for wearing brown face makeup at a private school gala nearly 2 decades ago. So this was in 2001. It was a yearbook picture obtained by Time magazine, which shows Justin Trudeau with skin darkening makeup on his face. And that has now caused quite the stir, Sharaad. Do you think that Mr. Justin Trudeau should be held up for something that he did 20 years ago?
Well, this is a big question, right? He does, in fact, say, I should have known better. But when you're young, you do all kinds of things. And it seems to me rather churlish and opportunistic of his critics to jump on this, something that happened 2 decades ago. Nevertheless, because he's a consummate politician, he knew not to try and defend it or bring some sort of nuance to it and talk about what was like 20 years ago and awareness about racism and so on. He just apologized. So kudos to him for knowing that actually you can't fight this by bringing, all kinds of complex arguments if you're a politician.
Wait a minute.
You just apologize.
So you're saying that his critics are being unfair?
I think so. I think, in many ways, this cultural politics, which has started to trump class issues and all kinds of substantial issues. I don't say I won't sort of say that racism is not a big issue. Well, it is a big issue, and obviously in the Canadian context it's meaningful.
Yes.
But the question is proportionality.
Okay.
How is this being treated with a sense of proportion, perspective, or is it just people saying, well, Justin Trudeau, in fact, you would have asked for the resignation of anybody who was found to do this. Now that you're on the hot seat, you're saying, well, I'll apologize, and maybe an apology is good enough.
I have to say though, Sharaad, it was racist 20 years ago. It's racist today, right? So
yeah, but the person was young, right? And so don't people evolve. And has he learned? And as a prime minister, has he demonstrated the same attitudes that go behind a tradition of denigrating dark-skinned people? Or has he, in fact, done quite the opposite? And shouldn't that weigh as heavily, in fact, more heavily, than something he did 20 years ago as a joke?
Well, okay, so the other thing, something for us to consider tonight is, at what point do we stop digging up the past, right? So if you're a politician, if you're in the public sphere, at what point can you go back and say you are held accountable to your actions? Is it just for the time that you are within the public space?
Well, I think for the media, there is no time frame. I think they will go back to your childhood if they could.
So we've all done, youthful folly, right?
Yeah, and political rivals, similarly. Why should they put a time frame and say, there's a statute of limitations on folly and, we shouldn't go back beyond, the time that you were 18 or whatever. It just doesn't happen because today it's so powerful as a tool to mobilize your supporters and also attack your opponents. Why would you give up that tool? It's unfortunate. I think it's very cynical, and I don't think it moves the conversation forward.
All right, there you go. Something for you to consider tonight. That's all the time we have on this edition of Consider This. We will be back with you tomorrow night at 10 p.m. I'm Melisa Idris with Sharaad Kutan. Good evening.